Okay, so let's talk about design. So usually, as I said on other occasions, it's not usually the field teams are usually the ones who do the initial kind of concept note or whatever it's called. But then, depending on the organization and its methodology of how their mechanisms to take decisions, because essentially deciding to intervene is a major decision, right? That it will commit funds, it will commit people, it will commit resources, basically, yeah? And if you're intervening in a conflict area, you will also be undertaking risk. So it's not a small decision, right, to decide to intervene in any place, whether you've been there before, whether you're there for the first amount of time. So a lot of consideration should go into making the decision to intervene or not. Okay, and then a lot of time and effort should go into making sure your design is as good as it possibly can. The problem is that there's several problems, no? And I've talked about them before. Sometimes there's not much training on design, yeah, and then there's too many people involved sometimes, right? But specifically, I would refer to there's not enough training on design and how to design. And unfortunately, in my opinion, there's a lot of training on log frame and project cycle management, but training on how to design a humanitarian intervention in a crisis or post-crisis, I haven't seen that much training on that. And I think that's key, right? Because it's easy to write things, as I've said on other occasions. You can write a very nice proposal, you can tick all the boxes, design very good objectives, very good indicators, but that doesn't mean it's going to be feasible to implement, and it doesn't mean it's going to achieve any impact on the needs you set out to have an impact on, right? So the design must be done properly, and it must be done, in my opinion, by people who are a mixture of people who know the place and the people, the culture, all of this that's kind of skimmed over, unfortunately, in the needs part. In the design, it needs to be gone into much more deeply, right? So spending a lot of time with technical people who don't know the place, and they have a lot of say in what gets or how the design emerges, is a lot of, as I mentioned before, it's experience of a technical expertise or experience of this type of contextual reality, rather than knowledge of the place, the people, the culture, etc., that is where you're going to be intervening. So every organization will have their own design process, right? But in my experience, you need to have a right mix of people in the design, okay? And often it tends to be overrepresented by certain profiles and underrepresented by others. So there's a tendency to kind of, I don't know, I mean, I haven't worked for every organization, so I don't know. In my experience, what I've seen is that the team will do an initial proposal or a concept, and then that will get yes or no by the hierarchy. And then once there's a yes, they'll work on it a bit more. And then there'll be yeses and nos, and there'll be technical people who have a look and modify, and more people become involved in the decision-making process. And sometimes it turns out to be more of a decision-making process than a design process, which is problematic, right? Because you need sufficient people in the design process to make the implementation feasible and to have the maximum impact on the needs, right? So too many people who don't know the contextual realities of the crisis won't work. And often the people who know the most about the contextual realities are the people who are not involved in the design process, i.e. the people who are affected by whatever's happening, that has produced or generated the needs or generated the problem. And the execution staff, let's say, often most of them, national staff or local staff, those are the people who know most about the place, the people, the culture, the realities, etc. And they're the people usually that are least involved in the design phase. Okay, so the design phase usually is led by teams in different places, right? So some on the field, some in the capital, some in the HQ, some in the donor offices, some are in the coordinating offices of the UN or whatever, yeah? But with perfunctory or superficial inclusion of the people who are going to be most decisive, let's say, in the in implementation phase, or most affected by how the actual thing is designed. Okay, so that's a problem. And then, as I said before, the contextual realities are evolving all of the time. Okay, if you have a certain amount of needs that are critical or acute, let's say, when the needs assessment was carried out, but then you're maybe a month later and you're in your decision-making process, your design process, and maybe for whatever reason, either the needs have got better or they've got worse because there was other interventions that were a bit faster, or because the crisis escalated and got worse, whatever. But it's unlikely, unless it's like very soon, that things are staying the same. That doesn't mean that there's huge oscillations and things like that, no, but rarely things stay the same, right? But sometimes we're so focused on what we're doing in the design that we're not looking up and checking what we're doing against what is happening now, right? That's why I say as well that it's so important to look at the past. Also, when it comes to like needs, and I'll talk about needs much more in depth, we need to understand, okay, what is influencing the needs, right? What is causing the needs to exist? What are contributing factors that make the needs worse or better, or etc. We need to understand all of that in our design, right? Because we can't just imagine that there's just us intervening on these needs. People themselves are constantly intervening on their own needs, and other entities are also intervening. So we need to understand the degrees, let's say, of cause and effect and correlation that are impacting on these needs, and incorporate them into our design, right? If not, it will be not as effective in the implementation, and especially in the impact phases. When you have a design, right, it's not enough to say, okay, I'm going to be, these are my objectives, these are my activities, and these are my indicators. Right? Is that a design? I think that's a program, yeah, a set, kind of a group of activities that are related and striving to reach specific outcomes, right? But let's go back to the idea of a humanitarian intervention, right? There's a crisis, and the idea is that with humanitarian interventions that they are quick and have quick impact, so that the needs don't get worse, right? And they get better. Again, impact, right? The point of humanitarian action is impact. It's not just to kind of be there and be doing stuff that has no impact. The design, when it will have to be embedded, strongly embedded in the contextual realities. If not, it won't grasp all of these causal interreactions, the interdependencies, and when we write in our paper risks and assumptions that are often copied and paste or very superficial, they're not going to help us in determining the feasibility of the design. The feasibility of the design links to the feasibility of the implementation, right? Because if I have a flaky design, my implementation is going to be very problematic. And if I have a design as well that is like an optimistic design that I don't consider how robust my internal organization is, and I design for extreme robustness, but I don't really have that type of organization, then I will have a lot of problems in the implementation phase. So what is in your design needs to pre-resolve as much as possible internal dysfunctions and performance issues and external realities that have an influence, positive or negative, on needs or my ability to execute my design. What we call blockers and enablers. Okay, so in my internal organizational context, there will be blockers and enablers, right? There will be organizational problems that get in my way, and there will be organizational enablers that help me to execute my design. And it's the same with external. Often we don't look at the external ones enough, right? So we need to incorporate what is going to get in my way in executing this design already in the design, and what is going to help my design, right? But we can't make decisions about this ourselves because often it's people, right? People outside of my control that will end up being either enablers or blockers or neutral, let's say, in how I am my ability to execute my own design, right? So if I'm not understanding that and I don't incorporate it into my design, I will just end up problem solving every day, or as we do, putting out fires every day, because they're not incorporated into the design and they're not being anticipated in my implementation strategy or my implementation tactics. But most of the time, a lot of the problems that you have along the way in implementing or executing your design could have been either eliminated or mitigated had you or had whoever did the design spent enough time understanding the contextual reality and being more realistic about the organizational realities.